You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy. This evening, Roisin, we have a politician in profile. We'll be joined by Sinn Fein TD for Carlow, Kilkenny, Kathleen Funchion. Kathleen was first elected to the Carlow, Kilkenny constituency in 2016. She also was a Sinn Fein candidate in the 2007, 11 and the 2015 by-election in the constituency. Since becoming elected, Kathleen has been very vocal and active on a range of different issues. She is currently chair of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children, Disability, Equality and Integration, and she has been very vocal on issues such as childcare, domestic violence, the mother and baby homes, and much more. Prior to being elected to the Dáil in 2016, Kathleen was a member of the Borough Council in Kilkenny from 2009 to 2014 and Kilkenny County Council from 2014 to 2016. And Kathleen also worked as a trade union official for SIP2 for many years. Kathleen, you're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on, to yourself, Paul, and also to Roisin.
Yeah, I suppose, Kathleen, these type of conversations are kind of about looking at the person behind the political profile. You joined Sinn Fein in 2003, I believe, while you were still in college. I know a lot of political parties, you go into universities and they have kind of open days, and I'm sure there's every political party is there, and they all try. Some will give you a pen, some will give you a book, some will give you lots of different things in various events. So why did you join Sinn Fein in 2003?
Yeah, so I actually was just finished college when I got involved with the party. So I had finished, let's say, the May-June 2003, and it was actually June 2003 I joined Sinn Fein. I actually went to the American College in Dublin, which is on Merrion Square. So they actually they were a smaller college. So in general, they didn't have like we did have like a students' union and some kind of organizations, but we never had really political organizations come in. Sometimes actually that's a lesson for political parties, not to forget the smaller institutions and colleges as well. But I joined, so I had done sociology, like social science, as my degree, and I felt it really kind of made me aware of lots of how the world works, I suppose, and why certain things are the way they are. And we had done a lot about like the education system and, you know, kind of like labeling people and self-fulfilling prophecies, which I found really interesting. And then Sinn Fein was very active in the area that I was living in Drimna in Dublin at the time. It actually was Angus O'Snoddick's constituency, and they were regularly going around with leaflets, and I felt like I agreed with a lot of what they were saying. And I also really liked that what they had to say, they said it straight in plain English, no jargon, no trying to figure out what do they mean. And I kind of liked all of that. And then separate to that, I suppose, but kind of linked, I really had an interest in history. It would have been my favorite subject when I was in secondary school, and particularly Irish history. Yeah, and so I sort of had an interest in kind of history and Irish history, and I had been reading a lot kind of about the hunger strikes and different things like that as well. And then I had read a book about Sinn Fein, and I just decided one day I wanted to join and I wanted to get involved. So I got onto their head office. It was back in the days of landline phones. You know, obviously we had mobiles, but it was still, I remember, because I always remember ringing and applying to join. And then so they would kind of tie you into your local area, which was Kilkenny, because I would have given obviously my parents' address. And so I went to them. I didn't actually really get involved then until I think it was late 2003 when I met some people from the organisation in Kilkenny, and I would have gotten very involved then helping in the 2004 local election, canvassing in the city. So that was like my first kind of canvassing election experience.
And of course, prior to being elected to the Dáil, you worked as a trade union official for many years, and your dad Phil was a SIP2 trade union official in in Kilkenny for like 22 years. I suppose you would have probably grown up in an environment where, you know, your dad being a trade union official, everything to trade unionism can be very, very political. I suppose
Yeah.
that kind of sense of, how the world works and some of the justices that exist, I'm sure, would have been evident,
Yeah,
from an early age,
definitely.
like that.
Yeah, so like that would have been, we always would have known about elections in the house, and there always would have been, like, I suppose, my parents would have tuned into the counts. I remember kind of taking an interest when I was about 10 or 11. And ironically, actually, when we were watching the count, I was kind of going for the Greens at the time. Like, I obviously had no
Right.
understanding of how it worked and how smaller parties, at that point in particular, really didn't have much of a chance. But so yeah, and my mother as well, in fairness, would have been very, like, she probably doesn't see herself as political, but she actually really is, because she would have been, she definitely would never stand for any sort of injustice, and she'd always feel the need to kind of call that out, even if she saw something, that she wasn't happy with, maybe in a schoolyard or something like that. Like, so I often think she's probably more political than she realizes, but we definitely would have grown up with a sense of, like, you don't cross a picket line, you support workers, a kind of a sense of equality, I suppose, and a sense of social justice,
Yeah, I suppose if you were to take a snapshot of Kilkenny in the early 80s from a kind of a trade union point of view, in the early 80s, Fieldcrest went, and that was a massive blow to Kilkenny City and beyond, and that had a lasting impact for a long, long time. So there was, a lot of difficulties during your dad's time as a trade
Yeah.
union official.
Yeah. There was a lot more strikes then. You very rarely hear about industrial action now and strikes. And I think that's actually not a good thing. I think either for workers or for the trade union movement. Not saying that everyone should be on strike on a regular basis, but I think workers maybe had a better sense of the power that they had when they stuck together a number of years ago. And I think that's probably is waning a little bit in society, and that's not a good thing, I don't think.
Absolutely. And 2007 was your first general excuse me, general election. You were the Sinn Fein candidate for Carlow, Kilkenny, because Tom Kiernan had ran in 2002. How was that first experience? Am I correct in saying you were pregnant with your first son?
I actually had I had Emmett in February, and the election was May.
Right.
So he was 3 months old exactly on the day of the count. And I will never forget that experience. It was, I don't even know what words used to describe it, because first time candidate, I'd never put myself forward for something like that before. I didn't like the public part of it to a certain extent. I didn't like I was nervous about the radio. I was nervous about speeches. I was nervous about going to the public meetings, even though I really wanted to be involved in change and making change. I didn't ever see myself as being the actual candidate. And then I obviously was a first time mother as well, to add into the mix. And so it was interesting, let's say, during that time. It was a baptism of fire on both accounts. But we both survived, both myself and Emmett. And, to a certain, they both, my boys were kind of born into all of this. So in one way, they know no different. But yeah, it being very honest, it was tough going at times during that few months, because, as I said, there was so much. I was on maternity leave. I was actually working for Bank of Ireland at the time in their call centre. And it was just, most people don't spend their maternity leave in an election campaign. But it was interesting, but it was good. And it was a good first, locally, we increased our vote marginally. It wasn't a huge amount. I think it was by about a couple of hundred, but still, for us, we were happy with that. We kind of knew going into it, the chances of us taking a seat would have been extremely slim, given that we had no even local representation and hadn't had representation since 1923. So our expectations were managed, I would say.
Kind of brings me nicely to my next point. So 2007, from that base you built, you were able to win a seat on the then Kilkenny Borough Council. Now, borough councils were scrapped. Part of local government reform in 2014. How did you find that period on Kilkenny Borough Council? You were on it with some big personalities, and the likes of Betty Manning was there. You had Mary Fitzpatrick. Yourself and Malcolm Noonan were elected members of that borough council.
Yeah.
And you're both now TDs, so that's kind of interesting as well. So how did you find that experience of being on the borough council?
Yeah, so that was the first time to be elected, and obviously there was huge excitement because we hadn't had a representative since 1923. I have to say I loved the borough council. I often say to people, if that hadn't been my first involvement in elected life, I don't know would I have stuck with it. It was, people worked really well together. That sounds like kind of a cliche thing to say, but it really was different. And I can say that when I was elected to the county council in 2014, I saw a huge difference. While obviously people still worked together, it was different in the borough council. There was a kind of a, I don't know how to even describe it, but people really did work together. And
there
to
was
be honest,
kind of a narrow kind of focus, whereas in the county council, everybody is, making sure that their area is, well served, which is what people elect councillors to do. But I suppose when you had a town or borough council, it had that strategic focus on Kilkenny City, which is the largest urban area in County Kilkenny, and a very important economic
no, it was great. I have to say, I really enjoyed it, and there were some great people on the borough council, and particularly Joe Reedy, former Fianna Fáil councillor, was always very fair and very good to me. I was obviously very new. I didn't have former colleagues or colleagues that we hadn't had any Sinn Fein person on there, so even down to things that you think everyone would know, but like the seating arrangements and how that's all planned and everything, and
God,
there was
just sitting in the wrong seat.
I know. I actually did that one evening, and obviously it was fine, but there were some great people. I really have huge respect for everybody that I served on the borough council. It kind of holds a special place for me. And myself and Joe Malone and David Fitzgerald were all elected together in 2009. And I think we one of my things that I think was the best thing I was ever involved with was in the city, where the old swimming pool was turned into the boxing club for Margaret City Boxing. And I just think that was a great example of how well the borough council worked, and how when councillors stuck together and really worked on an issue, you could get a great result. And it still remains one of the things I point to as a positive, since I've been involved in politics, that I'm really glad to say I was involved in.
And then the borough councils were scrapped and were elected to the Kilkenny County Council. Now the area you covered, Kilkenny West, was like massive. It covered was all the way out to Callan and parts of the city and stuff like that, and places like Danesfort and Stonyford, and it's a very mixed and diverse area. Do you think getting rid of town councils was a bad move?
Yeah, I think I don't think they should have just put an axe to all of them. I think they should have looked at where it was working. I know that there were some very small town councils that maybe you could say could have been subsumed in, but I certainly think that the city suffered as a result of that, because the budget for the city was subsumed into the whole county budget. And not just that, I think I think we need like a separate representation for the city, and I think there's been a lot of not just that, but then I think a lot of the power for councillors was taken away as well in that same 2014. And there's everyone, as you said, has their area and the interests of their area at heart, and it's very hard to manage that. I know then you have like the kind of region or the municipal areas, but I do think it was a big loss, the borough council. And
I'm sure you're certainly hoping Sinn Fein will be in government after the next election, which, if the opinion polls are to be correct, it looks very likely. Do you think this is something that a future minister for local government in Sinn Fein, possibly Eoin O'Brien, will look at?
Yeah, I certainly think in terms of the role and the power of councillors, that needs to be looked at. Because people are going forward, they're putting their names out there, they have a mandate then, and it's really important that they're able to have the power to make the decisions, and it's not just people who are unelected. kind of calling the shots as such. So I do think that's something that would need to be looked at, kind of in a whole reform of local government in general, because I certainly think councillors need to be given more powers.
Yeah, and your second attempt at the Dáil was in 2011. That was, a massive election. It was post IMF bailout. Fianna Fáil
Yeah.
as a party were absolutely decimated. With maybe a bit of luck, or maybe a bit of for you could have maybe nicked the last seat, but as a result, you continue to build the base even more.
Yeah, so I actually was pregnant with Finn in that election. So luckily enough, that pattern didn't continue for me. But yeah, so that was in February as well. Actually, all the elections for the last, oh no, sorry, the 2007 was May. February was 2011, and then since 2016 and 2020 have also were February. But yeah, that was really kind of it was a snap election. The Greens, I think, kind of had said they were going to leave, and that they did then, which was totally understandable. I think a lot of people would say they maybe left it too late because it was full 4 years later, but it was a really strong election for Fine Gael and Labour, who then ultimately went into a coalition. I think it was probably the start for Sinn Fein as a party in terms of really building, because we had only 4 elected reps, TDs, I should say, up to then, and then I should know the numbers, but I don't. But I know it was the election where a lot of people, and where we just narrowly, like I always think of Wicklow, where there was the recount between John Brady and Stephen Donnelly. And but yeah, it was kind of, I think, the start of us really becoming significant and kind of really relevant players here in the 26 counties.
Absolutely. And prior to even to 1997, you only had 1 TD, so the party has grown significantly. From one stage you were a party of 2%, and now you're 10 times that at the moment, at least.
Yeah.
And
So
Kathleen, Kathleen, you said that you began your political career as a new mommy, as a new mommy and so you've really grown into politics. Your children have grown up with politics, but you have really grown into politics as well. And especially as a woman, so I'm going to come from the woman's point of view, as a woman in politics, and with all the data that goes with it, that women haven't always had it easy within the politics, locally, nationally. And but I do know, because speaking to Betty Manning and Mary Fitzpatrick, two of your colleagues, that they said locally that when you were all in together, that it wasn't, that men really did look after you locally, was all very courteous. How was that now? Have you seen a change in how women are treated within politics and within the political parties?
Yeah, so I would say that, like, while people always got along very well locally, I might take a bit of a different view than Mary and Betty, in the sense that I don't know if necessarily women got a harder time, but I think they're definitely were more likely to get a harder time, and that starts from even just getting selected and even putting your name forward, and then that in itself can be a battle in terms of, I'm not talking about people running against you. Like for me, we really, I was really encouraged by the party to run. I had no interest in doing it because I didn't feel I had the confidence to do it. And that was the key thing for me. And at times that continues to be an issue for me. Like I still question myself. I still doubt myself. I still kind of wonder about things and overanalyze things. But I definitely think what women are more likely to get is, first of all, I find at times you're not taken as seriously. Like I remember for like the first kind of good few weeks that I was elected in 2016, when I would be coming into the job, people would be like, "Yeah, can I help you?" And I'd be like, "Well, actually, I'm a TD here," and they'd be like, "Oh, sorry, deputy." Like they wouldn't recognize you. And I just feel if you were a man in a suit, that they would have been less likely to ask that question. Now, I know there was a lot of new people elected in 2016 and all the rest of it, but I sometimes give that example as just the difference. And certainly, particularly around social media, around appearance, around if you're wearing the same outfit more than once or twice. I often tell the story of my red coat, that people, one particular person that I ended up blocking, who was really nasty and just really rude and horrible, just constantly was going on about how I must just only have this one coat, I'm always in this red coat. And it really made me paranoid about it for a long time. And then I'm glad to say that in the last kind of year or two, again, I stopped thinking about that and I started wearing the red coat again. And it feels like you have that, and then other people would be like, if you're constantly in different outfits, you're accused of, you're just in, I don't know, that you must have loads of money if you're constantly changing your outfit. So it feels like sometimes you can't win as a woman. And the ultimate thing that remains at local level, national level, European level, is how it's not family friendly. It is absolutely not family friendly. And that's not just for childcare, it's also for people who might be caring for elderly relatives, or, because the vast majority of the care responsibilities fall to women. And then if it's not family friendly and you are maybe in a 2-parent situation, it is even less family friendly for people who are parenting on their own. And if we really do want women involved in politics, and also if we want a range of opinions and a range of backgrounds, and young people, older people, people who are parenting on their own, all the rest of it, we need to have a more family friendly system. And it's one of the things that just frustrates the life out of me, because there is no other job where the schedule is so unpredictable and changing, and you don't really know from one week to the next exactly what might be on, or so you really have to have a huge amount of support in the background in some way, shape or form. Whether it's a partner, whether it's parents, whether it's family, which I'm very lucky between my parents and my sister. They are particularly helpful. And my kids are 15 and 11 now. So it does, obviously, that part of it gets easier too. But, it's constant planning and organising and juggling and thinking, what time now do we need to be there? What time do we need to be here? You can see I'm doing this interview from the car. So it's constant, just kind of on the go. And I think if they had it a little bit more, and I think that would be good for everybody. It's not just a women's situation. There's a lot of young men now very involved with their kids, which is great, very hands-on. We have a lot of young male TDs who either have children or are going to be having children, and I think we really need to look at changing that system.
And Kathleen, you were selected as a candidate for Sinn Fein before the intervention of gender quotas. Do you think they're a good idea to encourage women, or do you think they're kind of, some people have various different opinions on them?
I really support gender quotas, because I think you will often find it's like in lots of organizations, not just in politics, but in political parties, there is amazing women doing a lot of work, doing all the background work. And then you might say, gosh, you'd be great as a candidate. And they'd be like, oh God, no, I could never do it. I wouldn't be able, pick Johnny, or pick, it's usually a man. And it's like, that's where the confidence thing comes into it. And there's like a lot of research on the 5 C's that affect women going forward. And candidate selection is one, cash, confidence, childcare, and I forget, culture is the last one. So I do think that unless we have gender quotas, unfortunately, I'd love to live in a world where they weren't needed, but unfortunately there is still that mindset. And at least gender quotas actually make parties stop and think and say, hang on a second, we do need to look at this. We do need to ensure that we are supporting women and we are encouraging them, because there's some brilliant women who would love to go forward. But I often find women are waiting to be asked, whereas men sometimes are putting themselves forward, even if they mightn't be the most useful person. They think they're great, and there could be a brilliant woman there who will keep taking a step back. So I think that they're important, and I think it's kind of internationally they're shown to work. But I think one of the only things is it's really important that there is some link between gender quotas and winnable seats, because you don't want to get into tokenistic things, particularly where candidates or where parties are running.
Some people would say that they're just being added just to tick a box, and nobody wants to be a token.
Exactly. So like if you're particularly running 2 or 3 candidates, for example, it's not right that if the woman is the add-on, so it needs to be winnable seats. But I think they are an important part of it, definitely.
And Kathleen, you made the breakthrough in 2016, and you also contested a by-election in 2015. You came up a little bit short, but you had a very good vote, and it laid a foundation for the 2016 election victory. And then in the last election, you achieved a massive result of nearly 17,500 number ones. I know we chatted about this before. Did you see that coming at all?
No, definitely not. First of all, like actually from 2014 to 2016 was insane, because there was a local election in 2014, there was a by-election in 2015, and then there was a general election in 2016. So I always remember by the end of that, when there was a poster going up for anything, advertising anything, my kids were like, oh, please don't tell me there's an election, because they were just associating posters with elections, and it was really kind of intense. But 2016 was amazing. It was great to make the breakthrough. I honestly don't think I ever saw us having a TD in Carlow. I'd never really thought, I was putting my name forward and everything, but I never really thought about what that would look like, or if we would ever actually achieve that. And then in 2020, to be honest, an awful lot of people wrote us off. A lot of people that claim that they're experts, in terms of political analysis locally as well, would have written us off. It's funny how people will say things before the election, but they'll never come back afterwards and say, God, I was wrong. Yeah. But no, it was amazing. It really was. It was just like, it was nearly surreal. And we didn't see it coming. I would say it was a 3.5 week campaign, which was obviously really short, so it was quite intense. I would say by the last 10 days, we felt secure that we would definitely hold the seat, and maybe even kind of come fourth rather than taking the last seat, because after the really poor election for Sinn Fein in 2019, we were trying to be realistic. Now, I have to say, I never thought we were going to lose the seat. I just didn't imagine it. I couldn't envisage it. But, because I was thinking, we're in a 5-seater. We took the 3rd seat the last time. We're doing good work. I thought we'd hold the seat. But certainly not in a million years did we see us topping the poll and getting the result we got, which was amazing. And also, I was the first woman ever to be re-elected in the constituency.
Only 3 women have ever been elected.
Yeah.
Kathleen, the party just didn't top the poll. You topped the poll locally here in Kilkenny. 17,500 votes. You were the first one over the line. That must have been a very proud moment for you, because Paul and I were both up at the election count for the radio. Your whole family was there. That must have been very proud for you, knowing in that knowledge that everybody was writing Sinn Fein off, and probably you locally as well with the Sinn Fein votes from the local election. But that must have been a very proud moment for you.
It was absolutely incredible. It really was amazing, and it was great that the boys were there as well, because obviously their dad was in Waterford running an election, and I was delighted that they made it back up to the Kilkenny count, and they were, because they've had a lot of sacrifices in their life as a result, and to a certain extent they've grown up in it, so they don't know any different. But at the same time, like, I do know at times it can be hard for them, particularly if we go downtown or anything and they feel like I'm being stopped by 100 people and, different things like that. So I was glad that they were able to be there and kind of join in that. But it was amazing. And to be honest, I had never really said it, but I had always wanted to break that. With the first woman we ever got elected in Carlow, Kilkenny, was in 2007. And then in 2011, but neither of them held their seats. And I kind of always wanted to be the first person to break that and get re-elected. So I was delighted. It was kind of a small personal achievement for me, and I was glad that that kind of was the way it went. So it was really good.
That's great.
It's always nice to beat the begrudgers as well, that have you had you written off,
Well, as Frank Sinatra said, the best form of revenge is massive success. And I'm glad that you do that. Kathleen, you're now chair of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children, Disability, Equality and Integration. I think there's duties in that as well. That it's an absolute mouthful, and I say from being a chair of a committee covering that scope of material, it must be very, difficult at times to get everything covered that you'd like to get covered.
Yeah, so I have to say one of my favorite roles is chairing the committee. I really enjoy it, and we have a great committee. Like, we really work well together, and we've come through some difficult times because we have dealt with a huge amount of the legacy of the mother and baby institutions, and so that kind of really, I think, in one way, kind of banded us together. Because we've had with some really, really good committee reports into the redress and into the information and tracing bill, and they've all been cross-party, kind of unified, which at times isn't easy to get, but we've managed to do it. And we're looking at the area of children in care and the foster care system at the moment. We've also looked at children with additional needs who have been waiting, particularly around the ombudsman, the children's ombudsman report on unmet needs, it's called, around the amount of time people are waiting for assessments and everything. We actually had children into the committee to tell us their experience of COVID. Yeah, which is brilliant as well. And we're hoping to have some more children in early December as well, about kind of another schools issue. So we're trying to do that as well. We also, when we were dealing with some of the bills on the assisted decision making bill, we did have people also who had the lived experience of having additional needs in. So we're trying to have as much as that as we can of people with their experiences coming in directly into the committee. So I have to say I love it. I love the Children's Committee. I think we're a great group.
And getting people, be it children or people with disabilities, in to give their thoughts on potential legislation is important, because it's more informed, and informed legislation is better legislation.
100%, yeah. And this is where it's such a basic thing, and I have to say it's one thing I love about being involved with Sinn Fein. We're really into the consultation. So when we're doing policy, like for example, I did a lot of work on the area of the early years in the childcare sector. Like, you have to actually consult people and talk to them and go out and listen to what people are saying. It's actually such an easy way to do policy. I can't understand why more parties don't do it like that, because it's the only way you're going to do it. There's no way you're going to be an expert on everything. So you have to actually listen to people that are involved in that sector.
And childcare, sorry, Roisin.
And Kathleen, before we move on to childcare, the mother and baby homes, you were very, very vocal, and you took it to the door and got about the birth certificates. Everybody been having access to the birth certificates. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was a bill that we brought forward last year, because a lot of people don't realise that you are not automatically entitled to your birth cert if you've been adopted. So it kind of depends on the circumstances, and it depends on how you were adopted and what the background was as such. So, like, to be honest, when I even heard about this, I was kind of shocked myself, because I just take it for granted. And it's something that you say to yourself, oh gosh, if I have to get that now, I'll just pay the €20 in the, if you have to get a copy at last minute or you're trying to find it. But there's obviously a whole cohort of people that are locked out from that system. So we put forward that bill last year, and it was passed. We got unanimous support. It didn't actually go anywhere, unfortunately, since. However, the government then brought forward their own legislation in relation to not just birth certs, but wider information and tracing of relatives. And so it's covered in that. So people do have access to their birth certs now as of October 3rd this year. So it's important, and it's good. And, all the records and the information that people who either were sent to the institutions or who were born into them, they really need to be able to access that. It shouldn't be this big panic and secrecy, and we have too much of that culture in this country of secrecy and hiding things from people. And it's a real kind of patriarchal attitude that, like, people wouldn't be able to cope maybe with the information. Like, that's not up for us to decide. That's people's individual stories, and regardless maybe of how difficult or hard it is, people are entitled to their information and their records.
Absolutely, and it allows people to be able to answer that big fundamental question: who am I? Where do I come
Exactly.
from?
Exactly.
And Kathleen, childcare, it's a massive issue. It's a huge cost, and it can be a massive burden on parents. Are you pleased with the movements in that sector? That for the first time, probably ever, there's a proper incremental pay scale within childcare or early years. You know, I'm sure that's a really good step forward.
Yeah, so like I think I had a mixed reaction in general to the budget, but I do think in both this year and last year there were some moves made towards recognizing the sector and the work that the early years do. The wage scale is really important. And then there was some moves made to try and reduce fees for parents. Now, it didn't go as far as what we were proposing, but I will say at least they're finally starting to recognise that sector and realise how important it is, and realise it's a vital public service that people are providing. It's really good for children, and also that like those working in the sector are literally, I don't know how they do the work
Yeah.
that they do. They're geniuses, and
I see it myself firsthand.
Yeah,
I'm blown away.
incredible. So it is. Yeah, it really, really is. Like, and the commitment, and I'm always amazed at how children like listen to them, and if they won't, they won't listen to you as a parent. But like, so it's amazing work, and it's some of the most important work that's done in society. And I'm glad to see. We do need to obviously make sure that that's increased year on year, and that it's not just left now as in, oh, well, we did something, that box is ticked, we need to keep the pressure on. But certainly it's going in the right direction, and that's always welcome.
And Kathleen, you have been very, very vocal in all women's issues as well, especially in the mother and baby homes, and especially to domestic violence. I was talking to Lisa Morris, manager of Amber Women's Refuge today, and Lisa said that you both work very, very well together, and you also took many topics and issues to the Dáil and asked the questions within the Leinster House as well.
Yeah, so I think the area of domestic violence, the support that, like, we do know for, it's mainly women and children that are affected. Obviously, there is men affected by it too, but for the vast majority of cases, it is women. And I think we need to call that out and not be afraid to say that. I think it's important that there's there's good supports there, particularly counselling, because if you don't just get up one morning and say, right, I'm going to leave this really negative, toxic, abusive situation, you need support, you need help, you're going to be doubting yourself, you're going to be questioning yourself, you're going to be thinking, will I make the move or not? So you don't just need a physically safe space, but you also need to, I suppose, work through all of that, the emotional part of it. And I think the counselling is really, really important. And I think the thing about Amber, their work they do is incredible, but the non-judgmental aspect is so important, and they really, really do that so well. There is no judgment whatsoever. People can come to them and tell their story 100 times. They're not saying, oh, sure, you were on the phone to us last week and you see you're still living there. They're really, really good with people, really, I suppose, gentle and just, supportive and amazing. And the facility that they have as well is really good. Like, it's actually a really nice space. It's obviously not where people want to be or want to be long term, but it is, and they really do. I can't kind of talk enough good about them. I'm so impressed with them and all of their staff. And one of the good things I think maybe coming from COVID is it highlighted a lot more the issue of domestic violence. I don't think it was a new phenomenon. That kind of annoys me sometimes when people say, oh, there was an increase. I think it was always there. It just was reported more maybe. And people were really kind of nearly in a situation where there was no, they were a lot of times they would say that, potentially men might have, if they had been going out to work or going out for drinks or whatever, and all that was closed. So it kind of heightened the whole situation. But I think at least we have seen an increase in awareness. We've seen the coercive control legislation passed. They are now looking, which was only introduced last week in the Dáil at second stage, the non-fatal strangulation and harassment bill. I think that's really important, particularly the way things have gone now with online. the online abuse. I'm not talking about just randomers, kind of who have an issue with the party, but people being really personally abusive to women and using online as their tool, maybe fake emails and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's important that that work is supported.
And Kathleen, I was talking with your colleague Grace Doyle, who ran for Sinn Fein in the local elections in Piltown in 2019, and she said you were very quiet and unassuming, but people shouldn't be fooled by that because you're quite steely and determined. She says you got that from your dad, and she said you were a massive help to her running for election. Your office was always there to help her with any issues that would have came up on the campaign train, and that you put her in touch with a lot of good people in the area of direct provision. So it's an area that Grace is very interested in. So but I think the real interesting point that she made, that she said that regardless of how late the Dáil would finish, you would always make a point of driving home, no matter how late in the evening was, so you could bring your two lads to school.
Yeah, well, first of all, those are lovely words from Grace, and I actually think Grace is a born activist. She really is. She's just amazing in terms of all the stuff around direct provision and everything else that she highlights regularly. I know that she was involved during COVID as well. I think it was like either collecting kind of maternity and baby stuff for some of the women in direct provision, and possibly toys and stuff as well around Christmas. Yeah, so I drive home there the odd time, I will say, because as soon as you drive home every day, someone will point out the one day that you ended up staying up in Dublin. So I am very sometimes on budget day, but that tends to be very late. So occasionally I will stay up in Dublin, but for the vast majority, I drive home, because when I was first elected, I did stay up, and the boys found that very difficult. It felt for them that I was away for a lot longer than I actually was. And so then generally I can drop them to school most mornings, and it's a nice time for us to kind of have a bit of a chat and a catch up. And it's important, obviously, to say, I think they keep me very grounded as well, because you're wondering, is it uniform day or is it tracksuit day? You're thinking, how are they surviving, because they never seem to eat a lunch, and all the other things that all parents, all the things that parents go through. So it's important. And I also think as well, it's important to kind of get that message out there that you actually can be involved in politics and have children, and that you can be parenting on your own and be involved. And it can be hard at times, but it is definitely doable. And we need to see more women coming into it, definitely, particularly women from all kind of backgrounds and all experiences, because that's what makes good legislation, having a range of opinions and backgrounds.
Kathleen, what would you say your three proudest political moments in your political career? Because we know your personal ones and your main ones will be as a mother, as you said, but we're talking tonight about what would you say your three proudest political moments that you say that you're very proud of?
The first one is definitely the boxing club, in the time that the boxing club were hoping to turn the old swimming pool, and all the councillors came on board with that in the borough council. I just loved that moment, and it's brilliant to see the use that they're getting out of that building and what it provides for young girls and young boys. So that is definitely up there. Also, there was not a cross-party motion. There was a motion that I put forward in 2019 to establish an autism strategy, and as a first step to establish an autism committee. Now, it took until this year for them to establish that committee, but there is now an autism committee in the Dáil. It's a kind of a one-off committee for, I think, 9 months. And my colleague Pauline Tully, who's excellent, who is our spokesperson on disability, sits on that. So I kind of feel like that's something that people supported and might potentially end up in actual results and change and difference. And then I'm not sure about a third one. I suppose kind of a general one is sometimes seeing things that you've been pushing for a long time. You can see them coming to fruition. Like like the childcare stuff, you can see that the government is taking on board some of what you're saying. So that's probably one as well. And in general, I have to say I like the working with some of the others. And I think that's why I really enjoyed the committee, because I like the cross party. I like working together. I like trying to see what can we get as the solution here. So yeah, I would say that they'd be definitely up there in my kind of favorite moments, you know.
Yeah, well, Kathleen, firstly, on behalf of Roisin and myself, I say thank you for taking the time to have a chat with us here on the Irish Political Roundup. I wish you the very best of luck for the remaining Dáil year, and doors always open, and we very much like to have you on again.
Thanks very much. It was great, actually. It was really enjoyable. Thanks a million.